Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to welcome many of you to today's speaker series of Mission 4.7. My name is Monika Fröhler, and I'm the CEO of the Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens. We have started this series as a partnership of the Mission 4.7 partners, including, of course, UNESCO, SDSN, SDG Academy, Global Schools, and also the Vatican, the Holy See, is part of our effort. What do we do as Mission 4.7? Well, we strive to support SDG 4 and particularly goal number 7, where it's about global citizenship education and education for sustainable development. And our clear target is to have everyone around the globe educated in exactly that frame, so ESD and GCED. Now, I have the privilege today to be joined by the formidable Yasmine Sherif. She is the director of Education Cannot Wait, an absolutely crucial, essential organization at this point in time. And you will hear more from her why. And I'm absolutely deeply thankful that you are taking time from your very busy schedule, Yasmine, today to talk to us, to everyone online tuning in, and to everyone who tuned into this Zoom webinar as well. Yasmine is looking back on a stellar career already, 30 years, more than 30 years of experience. She's trained as a lawyer, and particularly on humanitarian international law, but also human rights. She has done lots of work in the field, but also in headquarters in Geneva and in New York, served UNHCR, served UNDP, served OCHA, but has also seen the crisis up front in crisis-affected countries. So she served in, for example, Afghanistan, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Montenegro, Cambodia, DRC, Sudan, Middle East, also Jordan, for example, and the Palestinian territories. So we have an expert who is not only versed in the policy and headquarter kind of thinking, but also in the grassroots thinking and what is happening in the field. So right now she's joining us from New York. She has just featured at the High-Level Political Forum, and last week was it at the PrEP Summit for the Transformative Education Summit that will happen in September this year. And we will hopefully today use the opportunity, Yasmine, to hear more about your amazing effort to fulfill 222 million dreams, and you will let us know more about that. And also, probably, we will go into what your take is on the fora that just happened, the preparatory meeting for the Transformative Education Summit, but also the High-Level Political Forum that is reviewing SDG 4. And of course, we are curious, why is February 2023 particularly crucial for you guys? What is up there? And of course, can you tell us more about the challenges and experiences that you had with building Education Cannot Wait over the years? So dear Yasmine, I want to turn the floor to you and immediately ask you the first question of how does Education Cannot Wait support crisis-affected children and youth and deliver quality education in times like these? Over to you.
Apologies. Thank you very much, Monika, for your very kind introduction. And also my thanks to the Ban Ki-moon Center for inviting me, and also for your patience in rescheduling this. As I said, I was at the test conference, pre-test last week, and was unable. I'm very happy, I'm delighted to be here with all of you. Education Cannot Wait was created through a campaign led by the former Prime Minister of the UK and the current UN Special Envoy for Global Education, Gordon Brown. The reason he started this campaign 10 years ago, if not more, was that education was underfunded, severely underfunded in humanitarian contexts. And here we speak the Sahel, we speak Afghanistan, Rohingyas, wars across the Middle East, and occupation, of course. And as a result, education had to wait. So the first the international community would provide would be water, tents, food, but not education. It would be, the thinking norm was, that can wait until peace arrives. That can wait until the situation has calmed down, until the refugees return home. But as we know, conflicts are protracted. We look at Afghanistan. There's been a conflict in Afghanistan since 1979. We look at the Democratic Republic of Congo. We're speaking 6 decades. And so forth. It cannot wait if we really want to empower the next generation to rebuild the country and end the conflicts, and give emphasis to the resilience in those who suffer, so that they can arise out of those refugee camps, displacement camps, through an education, go back home and change things. So he took it to the World Humanitarian Summit together with UN member states and the UN agencies and civil society. And so it was agreed by world leaders to establish Education Cannot Wait. And we were then placed to be hosted by UNICEF in New York as a UN entity, because we were a startup fund. I was appointed 1 year later to build Education Cannot Wait, to materialize that vision. At that point, an estimated 75 million children and youth, of whom 39 million were girls, had their education disrupted because of armed conflict, forced displacement, climate-induced disasters. That number has exponentially increased since then, and we today have 222 million children, according to the latest research by Education Cannot Wait. What do? As a pooled funding mechanism, we bring together host governments, UN agencies, civil society organizations, private sector, foundations, to jointly, through joint programs, deliver collective outcomes, because that increases the chances of quality learning outcomes, that they actually learn something. And we also advocate for more funding to education. And thus far, we have mobilized 1.1 billion, and we have a financing conference aiming at the minimum 1.5 billion, hosted by Switzerland and co-convened by Norway, Germany, South Sudan, and Niger, coming up in Geneva in February 2022. So far, we have reached, and I will end here, we have reached close to 6 million children and youth with a holistic quality education, and over 30 million children and youth, half of them girls, in response to COVID-19.
Yasmine, these are brilliant numbers, full adoration for what you have achieved since the start, but seemingly the problems have aggravated. You were talking briefly about Afghanistan, Congo, Ukraine. I do know that Education Cannot Wait is also active in Niger, Chad, Ethiopia. And I'm wondering, for our listeners and for everyone who doesn't yet know Education Cannot Wait, can you tell us more about the concrete efforts, like the teacher trainings and the classroom buildings? How do you go about bringing education to those that really need it?
Thank you. Well, for Niger, Chad, and Ethiopia, we have 2 funding windows. And I'll give you that before I go more concretely into what this entails. We have 2 funding windows. One is called the multi-year resilience investment. That means that we develop a joint program with all the different actors based on comparative advantage are included in one program. And this is also consistent with the UN Secretary General's reform program, speaking about collaboration, coordination, and joint programming. They last for 3 years, and then they are renewed every 3 years. This creates that sustainability that you need. We have such investments in Niger, Chad, and Ethiopia. More recently, we have also used the second window, which is called the first emergency window. So whenever there's an escalation in crisis, a new influx of refugees, or a climate-induced disaster, we can quickly act and come in within weeks to make sure we bridge that particular crisis and address the education so that children don't fall out of school. And here we have done first emergency investments to Niger, Chad, and Ethiopia on top of it. because these are largely refugee contexts. UNHCR, together with this W, are coordinating. UNHCR coordinates on the ground, since they always coordinate refugee contexts. We ensure that the bulk of those who are in need are refugees, because it's a refugee context, working with UNHCR, and then working with UNICEF, Save the Children, and many others to provide what we call a holistic, child-centered education. Now, what does it mean? Teacher training, empower the teachers. Without teachers, there can be no education. The teachers are teachers and mentors. One has to bear in mind that the teachers themselves are also victims of armed conflict and forced displacement. They have just suffered as much. So we empower and train and provide the conditions and salaries for teachers. Literacy skills and numerical or math skills are critically important. So that's another investment, as is social and emotional learning. And we always ensure that there's psychosocial mental health embedded in the program. School feeding. If you are hungry, living in extreme poverty as a refugee, and you don't get one meal a day, it's impossible to learn anything. True. Water and sanitation. If you're going to go to school and there's not a toilet, there's no separate facilities for girls and boys, there's no protection, and you simply cannot stay in school. And so forth. Infrastructure, learning materials. It has the whole spectrum of what a child needs, especially a child or a young person who has gone through the traumas and living through it of brutal conflicts and dispossession and forced displacement. So that's where the funding goes, and that's how it's being used.
This is a very broad mandate, and Yasmine, I know you're making the most of it. You have been extremely successful. Can you maybe dwell a bit more on how the scene, how the needs change from the time that you built Education Cannot Wait to now? What have you seen, how it evolved? Like, what are trends that you have observed?
Well, the best way to assess that is through assessing the learning outcome. In our new study that is based on the best evidence across the globe, and that was validated by the expert group on education in emergencies and crisis, composed of UN agencies and civil society, of 222 million children do not access this holistic approach. And about 70% of them learn nothing. 90% actually. 11% learn numerical skills and they learn literacy, but they don't have toilet, sanitation, psychosocial services. So it's very, very bad. What we see when we measure learning outcomes, and our annual report will be released in August, and for those who are interested to get more data, you can see our previous annual reports, is countries like Uganda and Ethiopia and so forth, is if the learning, if the reading capacity when they started was at the age, and they were 10-year-old and it was non-existent. And after 1 or 2 years of our support, they have been able to achieve literacy and reading skills that corresponds to a 10-year-old, 11 or 12-year-old. That's one way of measuring that we have succeeded. That's one way of measuring it. Another one way of measuring it is you see a reduction in early child teenage birth or involuntary birth, because girls are actually going to school. You see a reduction in forced marriages, or you see a reduction in young boys going into armed conflict. So there's an improvement in the protection climate, but most of all, there is an increase in the actual learning and healing from the conflict. And this is all done through scientifically based tests and assessments of the environment and each individual child that is done by our colleagues on the ground. That's one way assessing success. The second way to access success is to see that we are actually implementing the UN reform, because now we see real collaboration, coordination in joint programs. Previously, agencies and NGOs were working independently, separately. There was no coordination, or there was very little or limited coordination. But now we have joint programs where you are bound to coordinate and collaborate in order to access the funding. So we see an implementation of the Secretary General's vision. And thirdly, the resources that we have raised. These are additional 1.1 billion for education in emergencies and protracted crisis. In addition, we see in-country an alignment of resources to this joint concept of an additional $1.2 billion. This is funding that was there, but now goes to collaboration and coordination rather than separate islands of delivery. And one last statistics. When we started, we attract both development funding, which is the larger part of it, and humanitarian funding envelopes. So when it comes to humanitarian funding envelopes, by working closely with OCHA, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, part of our governance board, we reached an agreement and implementation of increasing the responsibility of humanitarian coordinators to allocate their humanitarian envelopes and appeals to humanitarian funding. When we started, 2.4% were allocated by humanitarian coordinators. And a year or two ago, we had reached 5.1% because it was put in the terms of reference. They were encouraged by the emergency relief coordinator and instructed also to give more priority to education. So there are many ways of bringing education, which we have done, from the margins to the center. But first of all, we haven't done it ourselves. Education Cannot Wait is a platform. So the credit goes to everyone, the UN agencies, it goes to the UN leadership, the Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, to the governments we work with in terms of donors, but also the host governments, the ministries of education, and to civil society that are, it's a staunch advocate, both at global level, the civil society voice is big, but also as implementer on the ground.
Yeah, so well put. And I do know that the date that you mentioned in February 2023, there will be the big financing pledge again for ramping up the efforts in financing Education Cannot Wait. Switzerland, as you said, is co-hosting it, and other governments like Norway and others are joining the effort. And I'm just wondering, you made a pledge already what would be the need, the desire? How much money would you like to see at that point? Talking about billions already, but what would be on your wish list? And let me add to that story as well. Where do you see the major challenges that Education Cannot Wait currently undergoes? But also, maybe you can highlight 3 incredible successes of the past year.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I was just in a panel before I came to this interview where we discussed a recently released report by UNHCR and the World Bank. Their report calculated that if you were to reach every child in a low-income country, so it's not just education in emergencies, but any low-income country, having said that, at least 70 or at least 60 of them are in conflict or internal instability and could be a possible investment for Education Cannot Wait, and middle-income countries where you often also have refugees. if every child were to be reached with a quality education, that would cost 3.8 billion, 3.8 billion annually, 3.8 billion annually. Now, obviously, we cannot put that target for a financing conference for education cannot wait, or for any financing conference on education. We speak about multi-year investments. We wish we could. We wish that the world had the humanity and the generosity to shift the resources to those in need. So our conference, the high-level financing conference for ECW, hosted by Switzerland and co-convened by Germany, Norway, South Sudan, and Niger, the very minimum we are asking for is 1.5 billion. But that is a minimum figure. If the world could wake up to the dreams and the needs of the 222 million, obviously we would be able to mobilize billions more in that conference.
Right. Right.
But between now and then, do you think the world will wake up? Well, we can hope. We never give up hope. But for now, the target is 1.5, and I hope and I pray that we will exceed it. What are the challenges? Well, you take the big picture. The challenge, of course, twofold. One is that we have not been able to prevent armed conflict as envisaged in the UN Charter in 1945. We have not been able to deliver on education, the basic human rights as envisaged in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights and its subsequent conventions. We have not been able to deliver on Sustainable Development Goals, all of them, and certainly not on Sustainable Development Goal on education, number 4, which is actually a foundational Sustainable Development Goal, because without education, you cannot end extreme poverty. Without education, you cannot achieve gender equality. So for anyone who wants to invest cost effectively, invest in education, and all other development goals and human rights will be unlocked. So the challenge is wars continue. The challenge is that we have not managed climate change and the climate-induced disasters. We are not treating Mother Earth the way she deserves to be treated. And so this is the bigger political challenge. The second biggest challenge is financing. And I've already given you the numbers. You see what we have. You see that we are able to do something with the money we have. And I'll give you the success stories. If the money are there, we can do it. We can reach every single one of the 222 million, because education cannot wait, operates everywhere. We operate in militia areas, non-government controlled areas, in places where no one else dare to tread, to reach those left furthest behind, because we work with the UN coordination mechanism, and we work with that system put in place in country for decades. That's how we became so rapidly growing. We didn't create a new mechanism or a new coordination mechanism. We took what the UN had developed and optimized it. The challenge is financing. We don't have the money. Give us the money and we will make it happen. Now, success stories. I remember coming out to Uganda in 2017. I'd just taken up my position to lead Education Cannot Wait. And 1.3 million refugees had arrived from Southern Sudan due to the hostilities. And there was so much goodwill on the ground in the government, the Ministry of Education, the World Bank, the agencies, the donors. There were goodwill on the ground, but there was no financing. So they were all there, half of them children and youth, but no one could deliver education to them. The political will was there. So one strong strategic donor partner, the United Kingdom, which is our second largest donor after Germany, and the third one is United States, called me and said, you got to come out here. We need someone that can mobilize us all and help us mobilize resources to build a response that is sustainable to these refugees. And we went out and we worked the way I described, and we produced, thanks to our strategic donor partners. The UK and the US played a big role, but so did the European Union as well, and many other bilateral donors and UN agencies. UNHCR led the coordination, UNICEF played a role, everyone, and civil society and local organizations. We developed the first ever education refugee response plan that catered to the refugees and the equally impoverished host communities. And we made an investment of about $36 million as seed funds, and were able to attract triple or fourth the amount of that money. And that program is running still as of today, providing education to these refugee children. And we are now entering a second phase, so it will be continuous. It's still standing, it's delivering. And it's beautiful to come out and see these refugee children going to school, refugee teachers having a job, being trained. So that's a very, I think, powerful success story, because it also showed how it can be done. Others are, and I travel a lot because I want to see firsthand, is the enormous response to the Venezuelan refugees in Venezuela, which here is coordinated by civil society in close collaboration with the government of Colombia. You go into the classrooms, you see children who suffer the losses, and they are using the most pedagogic material in light, colorful classrooms with excellent books, learning math, learning to read, learning to play, art. They're smiling, they're full of hope. Or the refugees in Rohingya, and that would be my last big example, and we have so many of them. When the Rohingyas fled Myanmar, that was also in 2017, my chief of education, the education team, Graham Lang, he was in Bangladesh. He saw the Rohingya refugee children and adolescents arriving across the border into Cox's Bazar. Their eyes were hollow. They were totally distraught from that harrowing journey across the border, where a lot of violence, rape, and violations of human rights and international law took place. He saw them arriving. Education Cannot Wait was one of the first responders. We responded just a couple of months into their arrival. Dubai Cares, a foundation in the United Arab Emirates, topped up our investment. And then we developed and agreed with the government of Bangladesh to have a multi-year program. When you go out today to the Cox's Bazar, the refugees are actually going to non-formal system. It's not a lasting solution, because they should be going to public school in Bangladesh schools. But until that political solution is found, they still have to learn. The girls are smiling, the boys are smiling, they are playing with Lego, they are learning to read, they're learning to write. They are getting a normalcy in an otherwise very abnormal environment. So these are just a few examples, but nothing is so more rewarding than to go out and see what you can do with that financing and with that collaboration. It's absolutely rewarding, but it's also very sad, because millions and millions of more children and youth could experience that if we only had more financing.
So true, Yasmine, very inspirational, the things that you tell us. I want to encourage our listeners as well. If you have questions, we still have a couple of more minutes remaining. If you have questions, pop them into the chat and we will definitely address them to Yasmine. For those of you who don't know, Yasmine already wrote a book, and it's already now a couple of years ago, but your book is sold on Amazon and I have ordered it. It's coming to my post mailbox soon enough. A Case for Humanity is your book. And I wanted to ask you, Yasmine, the very personal question, what inspired you to write about it? Let me just quote one review. It says, combining passionate prose and global United Nations and human rights experience, Yasmine Sherif inspires a new agenda for world politics and personal consciousness. So, Yasmine, what inspired you to write this?
I thank you for that question. Hold on a second. I think I have it on my desk.
Oh, there you go. Wonderful.
Yeah. Together with my little United Nations flag.
Yes.
I know my people are there, so please take a picture. So you know, I since I was a young girl, and if there are any young people who have joined us today, I had a dream. Just like the 222 million children and youth out there who are dreaming of an education, I had a dream to work for the United Nations because I wanted to serve humanity. It was just an instinct in me. And so I studied international law at Stockholm University. I decided to become a human rights lawyer, international law. That seemed to me to be the right trajectory, and I felt so passionately about it. And many people told me, oh, you can't go into the UN until you have done 40 years or 20 years in the foreign service. And I said, no, I'm impatient. I can't wait so long. So I decided, no, when I graduate, I'm going to get into the UN. This is my dream. And as it turns out, I got an internship at the UN in Geneva. And I was 23 years old then. Freshly graduated, and 24. And then I started my UN career, and I went in Afghanistan, Cambodia, and so forth, built my life around the UN. All these years, I met so many inspiring leaders, colleagues, great people who really impacted me, whether I was at headquarters and I mentors that I learned from, colleagues, or I was in the field and saw the great work and the courage and the humanity of my colleagues, and also those we served. As a matter of fact, those we served taught me perhaps the greatest amount of humanity and empathy. I felt I'm a child of the United Nations, and today at age 58, I can tell you I certainly am. I went in and out because, as a mother and wife and so forth, I also had to give humanity to my family and my children. But I also felt somewhere, we also need to lift up the UN again. Nothing hurts me so much when people say, oh, the UN has failed. What a loser, negative statement. I always say the UN has yet to reach its potential. It's a much more positive way of looking at it. And then I started dreaming, what if Martin Luther King was in the Security Council, or Nelson Mandela, or Eleanor Roosevelt, and perhaps add some great poets like Rumi, or Jeanne d'Arc, or Rosa Parks, and then I started adding all these great personalities into a Security Council session that I had grown up and always admired, whether they were artists, politicians, leaders, civil rights advocates, into that session. And I created an agenda for humanity. Today, we're going to speak about humanity. And it is only a semi-fictional book. It's semi-fictional. It's fictional in the sense that I invited 100 of them into the Security Council to do this. The rest is real. I used their words, their quotes as one spoken and written, and weaved it together with my experiences. And they spoke up for humanity and the UN Charter and the United Nations in a way that the founding mothers and fathers did one day in 1945. And I realized they all thought alike. So the book is my love declaration to the United Nations, my belief in its potential, and it's also an effort to achieve the potential of the United Nations. I hope it inspires.
Beautiful. So to everyone who hasn't yet read it or who hasn't ordered a copy, go there and check it out. Yasmine, not only an inspirational speaker, but also an inspirational writer. Yasmine, I would fall short of the promise of this session. Would I not ask you as well, what would be your wishes for the Transformative Education Summit that we will experience this year? And of course, I would like to know from you, transformative education, what does it mean?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I do need to congratulate UNESCO to the excellent, I've already done so in person as well, the excellent pre-summit that was convened in Paris last week. I mean, it was very, very inspiring. And of course, discussions varied in different levels. You know, there were some discussions that would go in very technically what needs to be done, and then there were discussions with a bigger vision. I personally believe, because this is the United Nations Secretary General's Conference, and should our former legendary Secretary General Ban Ki-moon sit there, I'm sure he would agree. Because it's a Secretary General summit, the conference needs to have the big picture. That's what the Secretary General delivers, okay? Everything else can be hammered out, the details at a different stage. It needs the big picture. And the big picture is, one, we need to remember why the UN was created and the rights that we promise to every single child and youth on earth, with education at the forefront if we want to achieve anything in the UN Charter or the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. And then we need to translate that vision into action. And the best way to do that is to share resources around the globe so that every one of the 222 million children who suffer the most in conflict and crisis and refuge can achieve their potential through an education and help us create a better world than we as a previous generation has been able to do. And that requires financing. And I hope that the Secretary General Summit will deal with the vision and the morality and the ethics and the justice of all this, the right to education, and that our conference, the follow-up in February in Geneva, will then be the financing conference that brings this to fruition.
Excellent. I have one more question, and we still have 4 minutes left, from Jennifer, who says, wonderful presentation. Can you tell us what is the best way for individuals to support the program? Education Cannot Wait. Would it be donating money to UNICEF?
Thank you very much. And it's a very good question. We are hosted by UNICEF, but we have a board of, and this is the fascinating model of Education Cannot Wait, of strategic donor partners and UN member states and UN agencies and civil society and youth representatives who make all the substantive decisions, okay, including where do we place our money. So UNICEF is a host. It's a bit like the Peace Building Fund was hosted by UNDP before it became Peace Building, or the Department for Children in Armed Conflict was hosted. So while we are hosted, we are our own United Nations Global Fund for Education, Emerge, and Improve After the Crisis. So the funding would be donated to Education Cannot Wait. That's where it goes, to our trust fund. However, obviously UNICEF will get a great share of that because they are a prominent actor on education in emergencies. So they are one of our closest partners, but through Education Cannot Wait's pooled funding. So that is one thing. The other one is to advocate for education in emergencies, and the work that we as a global Education Cannot Wait family are doing with your politicians, with media, with anyone that can make an influencers, shift the focus towards education in emergencies and approach to the crisis, don't let fathers behind, help 222 million children and youth realize their dreams. So advocacy, funding, speaking to your politicians, your governments, be loud, speak up, let the world hear your voice echo around the globe for these 222 million children and youth and their dreams. That's what you can do. And you can make a difference with that. Your voice matters.
Yasmine, I think I couldn't have found better words. Jelena was still posting that you can support Education Cannot Wait and the mission by joining the campaign, the 222 Million Dreams campaign, and she gave us the link. And you can learn more as well on TikTok, Facebook, and other platforms. So thank you so much, Yasmine, for your incredible passion that you are dedicating to this subject. And thank you for your time in these busy times of high-level political forum and the preparatory tests. We do hope to hear more of you and definitely touch base with you then latest after February next year, but probably already before. Thanks to all the listeners on YouTube. Thanks to those that joined our Zoom webinar here for this very insightful session on Education Cannot Wait and their very important work for the 222 million dreams. Yasmine, kudos to you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much to you, Monica. Thank you. It's been absolutely a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for the great work you're doing at the Ban Ki-moon Center. And thank you to everyone who's taken time off to be together with us today. Thank you, each and every one of you. Thank you. And thank you to my wonderful team who encourage you all to join the campaign. Please do.